A national curriculum is the intellectual blueprint of a country's future. It dictates what millions of children will learn, how they will be tested, and ultimately, who gets to succeed. Because the stakes are so high, designing one requires absolute public trust. So when the New Zealand government decided to completely rewrite its educational blueprint, you might expect a rigorous, transparent competition. Instead, the contract was handed to a foreign corporation entirely behind closed doors. The government bypassed the public tender process completely and awarded the contract to an Australian firm called Learning First. Their job was to benchmark New Zealand's new math curriculum against international standards. The optics of this sole source contract drew immediate political scrutiny. Education Minister Erica Stanford claimed she was uninvolved in the procurement process.
However, when pressed in a select committee, she could not recall whether she had met with the head of Learning First for coffee before or after the contract was officially awarded. Outsourcing the foundation of a nation's school system without public scrutiny sends a clear message. It prioritizes opaque political relationships over genuine public accountability. The immediate casualty of this closed-door deal was domestic expertise. The New Zealand Council for Educational Research, the exact institution that runs the country's Curriculum Insight Study, was explicitly locked out of bidding for the work. When asked to explain this exclusion, the Ministry of Education offered a remarkably thin justification. Officials stated they bypassed an open tender simply because they were already working with the Australian firm and needed the job done quickly. Speed came at a severe cost. By freezing out domestic researchers, the government removed vital local context and cultural understanding from the very design of the curriculum. A competitive process isn't skipped just for efficiency. Skipping it altogether silences the experts who actually understand New Zealand students, allowing the government to engineer a predetermined policy outcome without pushback. To justify this massive overhaul, the government pointed to a crisis. They published recent data showing catastrophic drops in student math achievement, claiming only a fraction of primary school students were meeting expectations. This chart shows student test scores mapped against a specific baseline. Notice that the baseline here is labeled as the 2023 soft draft. The failing test scores the government publicized were actually measured against this older, much softer version of the curriculum, not the one currently sitting in classrooms. When researchers apply the real data to the new 2026 standards, the picture changes. Because the new curriculum is considerably harder, the visualized student score columns fall drastically below the passing threshold. Academic experts have looked at this increased difficulty and issued a stark warning. They predict that applying these updated benchmarks could result in a massive 80% failure rate among students. The government published the softer numbers to build a narrative of crisis while hiding a much harsher reality. Their new benchmarks are mathematically engineered to inflate student failure. The physical product of this rushed, uncompetitive contract is a syllabus that teachers are describing as gigantic and comically large. The sheer volume of material forces educators into a frantic race to cover the content before the school year ends. This volume dictates the teaching method. Educators widely refer to the resulting classroom reality as death by PowerPoint, a system that relies heavily on rote memorization and long lectures over deep, interactive learning. Despite the scale of this rollout, university researchers confirm there is zero solid scientific evidence showing that this government-mandated teaching style actually improves student outcomes. This approach directly contradicts the methods of world-leading education systems. Singapore, for example, consistently ranks at the top in global math achievement by deliberately teaching less total content, but requiring much deeper intellectual engagement with every concept. Millions of public dollars are now funding a curriculum that actively ignores global educational science. Instead of a proven system, classrooms have been turned into unproven testing grounds for an ideological experiment. When a curriculum is overcrowded and poorly taught, it creates an immediate downstream effect. The critical question becomes, which demographic of students drops out of the subject first? The burden falls immediately on students who require more time and targeted support to build confidence. Decades of data show these are disproportionately Māori and Pacific students, as well as those from lower-income whānau. This creates a severe institutional divide. Large, well-resourced schools are finding ways to adapt, while smaller schools predict mass class collapses.
In some locations, the number of Year 13 English classes offered is expected to shrink by more than half. And despite repeated questions from secondary school principals, the government's rollout plan contains a glaring omission. There are still zero answers regarding how these curriculum changes embed or honor the Treaty of Waitangi. A curriculum that only thrives in wealthy, well-resourced schools isn't a true national standard. It acts as a structural class barrier, carefully designed to advantage the privileged while simultaneously branding marginalized students as systemic failures. The top-level cause maps directly to the bottom-level effect. A closed-door contract with an Australian corporation resulted in an unevidenced teaching methodology that actively pushes vulnerable students out of the education system. When you strip competition and transparency from a government process, you inevitably breed a flawed and harmful public product. Education experts have laid out 3 immediate demands to halt this damage. The government must release the complete Learning First communications, publish the real benchmark data against the 2026 standards, and mandate a fully independent equity impact assessment. True educational achievement cannot be engineered in secret with foreign corporations. It has to be built transparently, anchored firmly in evidence, and designed to fiercely protect a nation's most vulnerable children.